Okay, so sometimes we may want to loop and repeat our animations. So what I've got here is just a robot that's doing a bit of a dance over those last 2 seconds. So each one of these layers is 1 second long. So in order to get this to dance like this, I've used what's called the puppet tool. Now the puppet tool is up here, and what it allows you to do is put pins on your subject and just move some parts of him around. And the best idea is to think of in terms of joints. So we can actually move some of these things around. You can drag that around like that. So we can animate that. So however we want. Now what you notice is down here, if we press U, it has actually given us our keyframes. So these are our start points. So we've got a start point there, and let's just select. Okay, so we've got a start point there. Let's just get that moving up there. And maybe we can just drag that so we can add points to here. As you can see, you get some pretty crazy sort of shapes, and we'll just drag his head up there. And because this shape or this graphic is one image, you can see that by when I move these around, actually distorting the whole image. So quite often if you just have your individual layer, you can get some really interesting looking animation that way. So we've got our little character moving here, so I've actually put in some extra points here just to tidy things up a little bit. So what I want to do is actually select those keyframes, copy that, and then drag that out to the end and paste them in. So now you can see that we've got kind of a, jumping around. So, maybe he can be doing a bit of a, whoops, got them all selected. You see that because that's one image, it kind of looks a bit like a skirt. So let's drag that up. So now you can see that we've kind of got this thing flowing like that. Alright, so this is our basic pre-composition. So pre-compositions are really important in After Effects. It allows you to group layers together, and then you can affect and do different things with those pre-compositions. So I've got just a basic background with a 10-second animation, and I'm going to bring in that pre-comp. So here you can see we've just got our robot dancing away over 3 seconds, but obviously when it gets to the end of that 3 seconds, the animation just stops. And so because our composition is only 3 seconds, what we want to do is we want to loop that over whatever time our parent composition is. The best way to do that is to right click on this layer and go down to time, enable time remapping. So what time remapping does, it gives you keyframes to control how long it takes to get to the last frame. But in this instance, what we want to do is we want to come back 1 frame, so that's page up, and we want to put a keyframe in there. Now I'll explain that in a moment. So we go to our next keyframe again. So we can either use the little arrow over here, or we can press K. So J and K allow you to go between previous keyframe and next keyframe. And the critical thing here is that we want to select that keyframe, double click, and we want to turn this to 0. Hit OK, then select it again and delete. Okay. This is a bit of a quirky workaround, but it works. And then we want to actually trim this composition back to that last keyframe. Okay, so the reason why we went back one keyframe was that when you loop an animation, if it goes to back to the starting point, you find that it actually has a pause, and so you need to go back one and trim to there so that you get a constant flow. So now you can see that we've just got our animation working over 3 seconds, but it's still stopping. Nothing's changed. But what we need to do now is to add what's called an expression. Now, expressions are used in After Effects to give it a lot more power, and it's basically a scripting language for After Effects. So you can put in scripts that do certain things, and there's a whole language around, giving functionality to different aspects of After Effects. What we're going to do, we're actually not going to write anything. So the way to get access to your expressions is to right click on the stopwatch with the Option or the Alt key held down. So Option key down, and now you can see we've got a text field here. So if we go to this little arrow here, and you can see that these are some of the expressions that you can use in After Effects. So we'll go down to Property, and the one we want to select is Loop Out Cycle Num Keyframes. Now, the loop out function allows you to control how your animation will loop. So with cycle, what it's doing, it's just repeating that whole cycle of your animation. Now the extra piece in here, the num keyframes, is telling After Effects how many frames are in that composition. To commit that, we just press enter, and now you can see that pretty much, well, nothing's changed because our composition still ends here. But if we drag this composition out, you can see that it's endless now, and you can see now that our animation is actually looping those 3 frames over whatever length the composition is, so it's 10 seconds. Now the best thing about doing it this way is that we can control this time remapping. So that means we can remap our time to make it shorter. So now we can actually change how long it takes for those frames to be rendered. So it means we can change the speed of our loop. And that makes it super powerful to fit in with the style that you want to use. Okay, so make it go a little bit faster. Okay, so that's one way that we can loop our compositions within After Effects. Okay, so before we get started on the other looping animation, I just want to go through a really important concept that hopefully you'll have some fun with. What I've got here is just a character, if you like, and I actually split this up in Illustrator into different layers. So the reason we do that is so that we can actually control these layers on independently. So as you saw before, by having everything on the same layer and becoming an image, it actually becomes a little bit clunky to try and manipulate that in a certain kind of way. So this is really about sort of character animation. A character needs to be articulated in such a way that the arms can move, the body moves, and everything has a relationship to everything else. In the 3D program, they call this IK, which is inverse kinetics. So that means that if somebody manipulates an arm, then the hand and the forearm will follow. But the way we do this in After Effects is that we break up our different elements. So this is the Illustrator file. So there's our axle, there's the wheel. So all this is in kind of in the location where things are. So we've got the left hand, the left forearm, and the left arm top. So that's kind of the top of the arm here. There's the elbow, forearm, etc. So we're kind of building it up like we're putting it together with bones, if you like. So quite often 3D software, they talk about having bones in models. So this is what they're talking about, is controlling how things move in relation to each other. So I'll just turn all those on again, and I'll just save that. Now going back into After Effects, I'm going to just go into Import, so Command I. What I want to do is bring that in as a composition. The important thing about a composition is that this will basically collect all of our layers and put them into one pre-comp. Click OK, and we'll drag that into our composition here. So I'll just blow that up a bit. Now sometimes you'll notice that with Illustrator files they look a bit fuzzy, so to get that to look like it's supposed to look, we double click on our composition down here. Now there's actually another way that you can quickly go to your compositions, and it shows your hierarchy. If you press Tab, you can see that it shows where the other pre-comped and where the other nested items are. So this is the comp we're in now, so if I click on that one, this will then take me to the pre-comp that has all of our Illustrator layers. So it's exactly the same layout. So here's the body of our robot, and it's got all the same labeling, everything that we need to create this character. Now, as I was saying, when you're seeing these soft images here, these soft edges, you need to actually, with Illustrator files, we need to just turn on this, we need to turn on continuous rasterization. That's this little star down here. If we turn all those on, now you'll notice that our image gets a lot crisper. When you're working with vectors, it's important to make sure that you select that. Otherwise it just becomes another rasterized image, which isn't a problem when you're just combining it with the other pixels in the clip, but sometimes you may want to resize the vectors, and that way, you know, to get the best quality you need to continuously rasterize. Alright, so let's just have a look at our object here. So obviously if we were to move our the body of the robot, you can see that it just moves on its own, so nothing's connected to it. Now what I want to introduce you to is this idea of parenting. So parenting is having child elements of your main element. So for example, if we parent the axle to the body, so I'll just turn off everything else. So this is our axle. Okay, so that's that one there. And we want to move that with the body. Now to do that we use these little twirly things called the pick whip. So what I want to do is I want to parent my axle to the body, like that. So what you'll see now is when I move this, you can see that it'll actually move them together. Now the thing to notice here is that because we're creating an articulated kind of a skeleton, our points of rotation and our points of scale need to be appropriate to where they're located. As you can see here, our anchor point is down here because this is the middle of the axle. This is the middle of that element. So if I was to rotate this, okay, you can see that it's rotating from there. Now if this was a wheel on the robot, we wouldn't want it to rotate from there. We'd want it to rotate from the center of this circle which is attached to here, because that's where the point of rotation will be. So to do that we use our pan behind tool, and we just move that anchor point to there. So now when we rotate, it's actually rotating around that point. So this is really important when it comes to putting your skeleton together, if you like. We need to address the point of rotation. Okay, so we now have the wheel. The wheel, we want that to be parented to the axle. Okay, if that's parented to the body, it won't work, because if we parent the wheel, we parent that wheel to the axle, now when we rotate the axle, it rotates with the wheel as well. As you can see, as we're building up our sort of, it's almost like a puppet, we're parenting different things to the body. Okay, so let's start with our arm. So this is our arm. So remember that we need to have the point of rotation over here, not in the middle. So we just drag that to there. Okay, so if we rotate our arm, it's now rotating from there, which is what we want. And what we're going to do now is look at our forearm. So the forearm needs to rotate from here, so we drag that up to there. And we also need to parent our forearm to the top of the arm. So we go forearm, parent to top of the arm. So now when we rotate our top arm, or the shoulder, it's rotating the forearm as well. So likewise with the hand, left hand, once again we need to put our point of rotation there, and then we need to parent that to the forearm. Okay, because the top of the arm, we need to parent that to the body. So now when we move the body, it all moves together. Okay. Alright, so let's just animate our little robot from actually we'll just animate the hands. Alright, so if we want to animate this arm, for example, so what we can do, we'll just twirl down all these rotation properties. And I'm going to have that as my resting pose, so I'm just going to click on the stopwatch. So this is where we kind of end up. Now what I want to do, if we rotate our shoulder, okay, we can rotate that like that, and then we can also rotate our forearm and then rotate our arm, our hand. So now you can see that we've got this whole kind of articulated movement. Okay. So, you know, he can wave, so when he gets to the top, maybe the hand, so when we're starting up there, maybe the hand can sort of rotate back a bit. So now you can see that he's kind of waving and dragging that down. So this is how you build up stop motion puppets and things like that. So if we go back through, I'll keep the other arm the same. Now we want to parent our mouth. Now obviously we've moved our robot, so we can still drag that over. Now you notice that the other arm doesn't move with it. Okay, so let's drag that to there. And we're going to parent our mouth to our body. And we're going to parent the hand to the forearm to the arm, and then the arm to the body. So now that should move together. Okay, so if I do an animation from, let's go from this side over to this side. So now you can see that we've got him moving somewhat slower. So maybe when he gets here, we want to animate the other forearms. Okay, so let's rotate that. And now you can see what happens when you don't change those anchor points, so it looks kind of odd. So you see that it's not as good as when it's done correctly. So that's kind of just an introduction to how you can set up these puppets, if you like, to be articulated and to have sort of this more of a character-based animation. And so I hope that helped, and we'll move on from there. Okay, so now we're going to look at creating a GIF animation from this animation here. Now, another thing that you'll probably sometimes come across is that if we do something like, if we try and scale our objects in here and we try and scale them all together, you can see that it goes a little bit sort of a bit wacky because it's using all the different anchor points and the locations to scale these things. So they're all kind of scaling in different ratios because of where they are. In order to control these together, what we need to do is create a null object and then parent our layers to that null object. So I right click, null object, and I'm going to label this one control. It's always good to label control layers because that gives you an idea of their functionality. So we'll just select all of these layers. Now sometimes you see a different mode in here, blending mode and masking. You can toggle these to the switches, and it's the same thing, just you've still got the pick whip, but just in case this doesn't look the same as what you're seeing. So I'll keep this as the default. So what we're going to do is just select those 3 layers and pick whip that onto the control. Now as you can see, if we start moving our control layer or start scaling our control, you can see now it's controlling everything. Okay, so by parenting those layers to that one layer, that layer gets control over those layers. Even if we do something like move it, then we're moving everything together, which can be a bit difficult if you're not parented to a null layer. Okay, I'm going to set a keyframe for my scale, and I'm going to zoom in to there. Maybe I'll zoom out a little bit. So now it's going from this point down to that point. And I'll just animate these scales over that time. Okay, so let's go back to our looping demo. And I want to bring this composition into our GIF animation. So I'll just reveal and project, go back here, and then just drag that onto here. So this is a 1080 by 1080, and now all I've got is just a simple animation going to there, and I'm going to trim this up to the length of this composition. And easy shortcut is just to press N, press right click, trim comp to work area, and now you can see that will just go from one to the next. If we look at our composition, you'll notice that it's 3 seconds. Okay, so we want to find a halfway point at 1.1 second, 12 frames. So if you look over here, we've got 1:10. So just go down 2 frames, and that's our halfway point. Now once we've got a halfway point, what we want to do is create another layer, and we're going to split this layer at that point. If we go up to composition, we want to split this layer at this point. Going up to edit, we then go down to split layer or shift command D. Learn that one because you use it quite often. Now I'm going to create a mask on here. So let's just go up to the circle tool, and now what I want to do is reverse that mask so that I've got a hole in my layer. So we just go down to mask, subtract, and now you can see that we've got a hole in here. Okay, so we've got our mask, and we want to give it a bit of a feather, so that'll just soften it up a little bit. And we want to keyframe our mask expansion. We want to keyframe our mask expansion in order to create this loop. We'll keyframe it here. By changing our mask expansion value, you can see that we're deleting and showing our mask. So, and I'll take it back to a negative number. So that's keyframe there. Go out to the end of this composition, and now I'm going to increase this mask expansion to go basically from the holes sort of small, and then eventually it ends up wiping out everything. And I'm going to drag this layer across to here. Now what that does is creates just a little zoom in with a mask, and this will be our looping animation. Once again, I'll go to our last frame here, press N, and then trim comp, and now what you'll see is that we have a 1.5 second loop. So you can put any animation you like in here, and you're not restricted to doing just a simple mask. Okay, now we have this looping animation. We want to render this out. So we go up to File and down to Export, Add to Render Queue. And we're going to make this a QuickTime render. And then we'll just render this out as it is from here. You can actually open it up in Adobe Media Encoder, which then allows you to continue working, but this is a fairly quick render, so you can see now it's just progressing through. And while that's doing that, we'll go over to Photoshop. Here we have our clip, Looping Demo 2. Okay, so when it comes into Photoshop, it just comes in as the same clip. Now from Photoshop, from here we go to File, Export, and make sure you select Save for Web Legacy. Now this is an older export engine, but this is the only place that you can export it as a GIF animation. Some of the controls that you have here, obviously the more colors that you have selected in here, the higher the file size. So at the moment it's 2.7 megabytes, which is quite large. So I'm going to reduce this down to 500, and this should come down significantly. Okay, so now it's down to 800k. With web graphics, there's always a balance between file size and image quality. If we want to make this higher quality, you can see now you get a bit more detail in the shadows. So this is 1.3. So this is probably a good option because you're getting much better quality and not a huge hit in file size. So GIF is basically made up of 256 colors per pixel. That's why you kind of get this stepping dithering, because you can't have a nice smooth graduated tone because you don't have enough pixel color information to work with. Okay, let's go save. We've exported that now, and let's go over to our browser, and I'm just going to drag that onto our browser. So now you can see you got a nice looping GIF animation, and that'll just keep going forever. If you find that you actually want to have it pause at a particular point, or you want to stop it for some reason, what we can do, just close this down, and I'm going to open up that exporter GIF animation, which is here, and now you can see that it's actually given us all the frames. So sometimes we may want to have a pause or some sort of temporary, may want to change the rate of animation. So if we just click on this little drop down here and go Other, if we click on this little arrow down here, we can put a different value. So we can put a 5-second delay on our animation and then re-export that. So save for legacy, save, call it the same name. Go back to our browser and refresh. So now you can see you get a 5-second delay. So have fun with GIF animations. They're a really powerful way of animating through After Effects and Photoshop. So the last thing I wanted to sort of talk about was using cinemagraphs. Cinemagraphs are ways of animating part of an image, and what we can do with After Effects is actually pause part of that image as a freeze frame and then animate part of it that's either part of the image itself, or we can animate separately. Sometimes people use photographs and then animate a part of it, or in this case what we're doing is using a video which we can freeze a frame and then animate parts of it. So let's get started. So we're starting out with a basic video. This is just a few seconds of content, and the first step is that we want to freeze the frame that we want to choose. Just scrub through the video and find a suitable freeze frame. The first step is to duplicate this layer, so then we have an original that we can use for the motion, and we'll do a freeze frame on the duplicate. Once we've duplicated our layer, we'll just hide that so that we can just work on the one below, and then we'll find a suitable frame that we can use to freeze. Okay, so this one looks good, and we'll just freeze that now. In order to do a freeze frame, all we do is right click, go down to time, and then freeze frame. and now you can see that it's just a still image that we can now work with. If we turn on our top layer, you can see now that that's just the standard video clip, and what we're going to do now is actually mask out part of this image, which will then sit on top of the underneath still. This is the area we want to mask out, so we just go to our selection tool, which is G on the keyboard. So we're drawing a mask with the pen tool, and now we just proceed to go around and just do a basic rough mask around our top video, and just make sure it's wide enough and fairly simple. And now you can see that if we go back, we've got a moving part, but now you can see that it's working where we've just got this animation, this video working inside that mask over the top of it. And sometimes you might need to just readjust the video to suit. So that's looking pretty good now. Sometimes what you might need to do is to actually just soften that mask and just change the outline so that it blends in a little bit better. Sometimes you might have a bit of a difference in tone, but you know, this is kind of the way that you can you know, incorporate some animation into your still images, or vice versa, have a moving image that you freeze frame and then put some motion in there as well. So it's a really good technique, and it works pretty well. So that's pretty much it for looping animation. So there's just some techniques there around how you can integrate GIFs or cinemagraphs into your motion work. So best of luck. Thanks guys. See ya.